More American troops are heading to Iraq to help battle thousands of ISIL fighters who have declared an Islamic State in the large parts of Iraq and Syria they control. The Pentagon announced Monday that another 300 soldiers are on their way to Baghdad, along with a detachment of helicopters and drones to bolster security at the U.S. Embassy and at Baghdad's international airport. Russia has also filled an Iraqi order to deliver 12 Su-25 ground attack fighter jets and sent Russian experts to help prepare the planes for combat. Meanwhile, fighters from the so-called Islamic State continue to struggle with Iraqi forces for control of Saddam Hussein's home city of Tikrit. On Sunday, a spokesman for the group's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, declared the creation of a caliphate, a Muslim state. He would rule under the title of Caliph Ibrahim. In a web video reportedly released by the group, a fighter identified as Abu Safiya from Chile said that breaking the border between Syria and Iraq was just the start of their ambitions.
Inshallah, this is not the first border we will break. Inshallah, we will break other borders also, but we start with this, inshallah. Inshallah, we will break the barrier of Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, all the countries, inshallah.
In a bombastic statement, the group's spokesman claimed Caliph Ibrahim was now the leader of all the world's Muslims, declaring all other jihadist organizations void and under his control. However, in Baghdad, residents told Reuters the caliphate was just an illusion. For more, I'm joined from Baghdad by New York Times correspondent and Kabul bureau chief Rod Nordland. Rod, good to see you. Thanks for doing this for us. So this group now says that their new caliphate is owed the loyalty of all Muslims worldwide. You've written that the announcement was little more than a propaganda ploy that shows the group's growing ambitions. How has the announcement been received by the Iraqi government and by the people there in Baghdad?
I think with a lot of mirth. I mean, but it does certainly show the hubris of this group and its leader, Mr. Baghdadi. But as far as any kind of practical consequences, it's pretty doubtful. What it has done is arouse the kind of hornet's nest among the jihadi community, who basically don't feel like they should be their leaders.
You know, on the other hand, this Islamic State is still holding on to Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's home city. The government offensive to retake the city, as you've written, has stalled. So it's not as if the Iraqi government is really making a lot of progress.
No, but they have managed to stop their advance, and that's pretty important. They're still fighting over Tikrit and towns around it. It's kind of stalemated right there now, but I think that, you know, a week ago, even a week ago, we were all worried about the possibility they would push on to take Baghdad, and I think the longer they're stalled 100 miles north of here in Tikrit, the less worried everyone gets. And that gives the government, you know, a big boost in morale and in support.
So there really is a lot less concern that these fighters might move south and attack the capital?
There is a lot less concern. I don't think, I think people would be foolish to completely dismiss them. I mean, they're not likely to become the rulers of the known Muslim world, but they do have a lot of capacity, they have a lot of weapons, they've basically controlled much of Syria and defeated some of the other jihadis there, and now they have a huge chunk of Iraq under their sway. So they're still a very serious threat.
Now, Iraq has taken delivery of 12 Russian Su-25 ground support planes, and you know, the strange bedfellows here that we're on the same page with the Russians and the Iranians and to some extent the Syrians. And U.S. forces are there. You've also written about what they're doing there. You wrote that 3 U.S. Special Forces teams are said to have been deployed north of Baghdad. You know, a lot of the talk initially was that most of these advisors would really not be out there, would not be far outside the green zone. So what are they doing, and how close are they to the fighting? Of course, raising concerns that there could be a slippery slope here and that there might be mission creep.
Perhaps, but I don't think anybody with very much knowledge of the situation would think they would just sit in the green zone and give advice to headquarters. And they have to get out there for a number of reasons. They have to get out there if there are ever going to be airstrikes in order to have ground forward air controllers. They have to get out there to see what the Iraqi army units are like, what condition they're in, what they need. Because one of the characteristics of this last few weeks has become clear that Iraqi generals are lying up the chain of command to Prime Minister Maliki and there's a lot of delusion going on at all levels, and I think they want to get out there and see for themselves just what the military needs here and what they can do for them.
And you bring up Maliki. Iraq's parliament is supposed to meet Tuesday to start the process of electing a prime minister despite the current crisis. Is Maliki still expected to win a third term? Because there's, of course, been a lot of push against him because he's been very sectarian, very pro-Shiite, hasn't included the Sunnis and the Kurds in the ways that those groups would like, especially the Sunnis. But he does still have the largest block of seats of any group in parliament.
He has the largest block of any seats, but he's a long way from a majority, so he needs coalitions too. And what we're increasingly hearing is that his potential coalition partners are just not willing to play. Certainly the Sunnis and the Kurds will not accept any sort of government with Maliki, and a lot of his fellow Shias have said as well that they don't want to make a government with them. So we're increasingly hearing that, you know, a couple other names, Shia leaders who might come forward and could quite possibly topple Mr. Maliki.
Yeah, well, lots of developments there, seemingly, certainly by the day, at times by the hour. Rod Norland of the New York Times, pleasure to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to.
For more, I'm now joined from Washington, D.C. by Robert Grenier, former director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center. He's an Al Jazeera contributor. Robert, as always, good to see you. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said that this is a critical moment for the international community to stand together. On Sunday, a spokesman for the Islamic State said that the announcement of a caliphate opened a new era of international jihad. Now, we've seen Iran, the U.S., and now Russia give military support to the Baghdad government. What does that say about the threat from this group that is calling itself an Islamic State?
Well, this is very much in line with their aspirations all along. Not only members of what we used to call ISIL, but many other like-minded jihadis in other geographies around the world have wanted to recreate a caliphate. And they, in terms of doctrine, they don't recognize international borders anywhere in the Muslim world. That said, there's a lot of hype involved here. These people haven't really consolidated their gains yet, even inside of Iraq. And so I think they're a long distance from establishing anything like a viable Islamic State.
So right now it does control a lot of territory in Iraq, a lot of territory in Syria. Most of it is empty desert. So does seizing all this territory by force and declaring yourself a new transnational state, new transnational country, really make it a state unless they get some sort of international recognition? Aren't they still just an army of vicious fanatics and thugs?
Well, I don't think they care very much at this point about international recognition. What they do care is seizing the attention of like-minded people in the Islamic world. And I think that this declaration may have that effect to some extent. It may encourage some international jihadis. There are already many who have already joined them, of course, to join them now in increasing numbers. I think, though, that the potential downsides to this declaration may be even more serious. There are others who are allied with them, particularly in Iraq, for whom this is a marriage of convenience. There's been a certain willful suspension of disbelief on their part. They've been trying to fool themselves, in my view at least, into thinking that they can control these people while using them against the Maliki government in Baghdad. I think this tells them that they're going to have to deal with these people sooner or later, and it may be a more potent threat than they themselves fully realize.
But you know, how much of it is bombastic? You know, this is Islamic State and its leader. They're claiming leadership of all Islamist terror groups worldwide. Charles Lister, who's a senior fellow at Brookings, says that, put simply, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has declared war on al-Qaeda. Do you think that's happened here, that al-Qaeda is in effect, they've really, you know, there's animosity here, and how will al-Qaeda react?
Well, there certainly is animosity, and in fact, perhaps the most potent wing of al-Qaeda that's actually accepted by the al-Qaeda leadership is the Nusra Front in Syria. And Nusra Front has actually been fighting with ISIL for about 6 months now. So these are people who are essentially living in their own world. There's a tremendous amount of bombast here. But I think this gives us some insight into their thinking. These people are takfiris. They believe that they understand God's will. They believe they understand the Islamic law much better than established Islamic scholars do. They believe that they can decide for themselves who is a Muslim and who isn't, and reserve to themselves the right to kill any non-Muslim. So again, by making this sort of a bombastic statement, I think it's a very potent reminder to Muslims all around the world what these people actually represent, and they're certainly not going to get much of a following in the Islamic world as a whole.
And because of that, there are already rumblings that some fellow Sunnis in Iraq aren't happy because of the heavy hand that these guys are displaying.
Oh, absolutely. Everywhere these people have ruled, they've managed to alienate the populations under their control. That is certainly going to happen in Iraq as well. Again, there are many people who are willing to fight with them now in the short term because they want to throw off what they see as the oppression of the government in Baghdad, but they certainly don't want to live permanently under this so-called Islamic State. And sooner or later, there's going to have to be a reckoning.
Given how many fighters they have been drawing from across the world, including from Europe and apparently as many as a few dozen from the United States, is defeating this Islamic State just as imperative today as attacking Al-Qaeda Central was after 9/11?
Well, I think the short answer is yes. So we need to be very, very concerned about this. Now, not only the Islamic State, people now refer to themselves as the Islamic State, but other extremist groups, particularly in Iraq and Syria, have been very much focused on their own issues. They've been at war with the Assad regime. They've been at war with one another. They're at war as well with the Maliki government in Iraq. And sooner or later, the situation is going to stabilize. And once again, once that happens, their tendency will be to refocus on what they see as the Western powers who are propping up their enemies. And that very much includes the government in Baghdad right now. So right now, as I say, I think they are very concerned with their local parochial issues, much more so than they are with attacking the United States or the West. But I think they're going to turn in that direction again once the local pressures are off. And as you point out, there are a significant number of Westerners, to include Americans, who have established themselves, whom they now trust, who have received training at their hands, and they could pose a threat down the line. There's no question about that.
Well, talking about that threat, and you mentioned al-Nusra in Iraq, that's the al-Qaeda affiliate in Iraq. As this Islamic State is doing what it's doing in Iraq, the al-Nusra people reportedly are looking into creating some sort of new generation of undetectable bombs that could be put on commercial planes. The reports claim that Homeland Security and the FBI have been looking into this for months, that they've been thinking about boosting our security posture at airports. One source said that the threat was disturbing, or actually different and more disturbing than past aviation plots. And apparently al-Nusra is also working with al-Qaeda in Yemen, which is reportedly one of the most dangerous branches of al-Qaeda. So again, how worrisome is this for those of us in the West?
Well, it's very hard to judge at this point. Obviously, we only have a few glimpses into this, and maybe that's the way that it should be at this stage. I'm a little bit skeptical of these reports simply because they're talking about different groups in very disparate geographies somehow coming together in some nefarious way. To the extent that may very well be the case, because there are personal links among these different groups, no question about that. Having the desire and the intent to develop these new aviation capabilities and actually achieving those new capabilities are two very, very different things. So it's very difficult for us to judge the extent of the threat at this point. But again, I think the larger point that we made before is quite valid, that sooner or later, as much as these people have been focused on their local issues and not so much on international terrorism, a day will come when they will focus once again on the United States and the West, and we do need to be concerned about that.
Yeah, we certainly do. Robert Grenier, it's always good to have you with us. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And now for some more stories from around the world.